Today is day number 3, the final day of Sanganai Hlanganani 2021, Africa's premier business exchange. My name is Hazel Zisani from the Zimbabwe Tourism Authority. It is always a pleasure to have you along. Our next webinar session will be hosted by John Howell. He is the CEO and founder of Aviation. And the topic for the session, this is going to be very interesting, and I know a lot of people have been waiting for this one. Aviation and tourism development. I'll give you a brief background on John. John has worked within the African aviation events industries since 2012. John created AviaDev, a content platform and annual route planning conference for Africa. It is now established as the largest event of its kind on the continent, having been held in Kigali in 2016 and 2017, and in Cape Town in the year 2018 and 2019, with the future edition planned for Madagascar. Additionally, John established AviaDev Inside Africa, the only podcast dedicated to African aviation in 2018. This boasts an audience over 170 countries globally with over 50,000 listeners. John became a very key person of influence during the coronavirus pandemic by delivering content and insight using digital means, including delivering Africa's first virtual event for aviation, tourism, as well as hospitality. And this is for Africa Tomorrow. This was held in July 2020. John is passionate about empowering the next generation of aviators. He co-founded Aviators Africa Academy in the year 2018, which has delivered outreach events across the continent and a new series of webinars for the next generation launch in September 2021. He was also appointed a global ambassador for gorilla conservation for his fundraising efforts, which included climbing 3 largest mountains in the United Kingdom in a single weekend. Now get this, John was wearing a gorilla suit. Do you have any pictures of this gorilla suit, John?
Certainly do, Hazel. Yeah, certainly do. I will send them over.
Thank you very much. It's over to you. Blow us away.
Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you so much, Hazel, for the kind introduction. It's great to be sort of virtually in Zimbabwe. My relationship with Zimbabwe goes back 10 years when I first started work in the field of aviation and tourism in Africa. I was part of the team that delivered a big event there at Elephant Hills Hotel in 2014, and I've been back many times since. I've experienced the tourism product myself as well. I've played golf at Elephant Hills Hotel. I've rafted the Zambezi. I haven't yet done the bungee jump, but if Sean's up for it, then maybe we can do that one together. And I've also taken in one of the more sedate but beautiful sunset cruises with the hippos and the elephants and all the other wildlife that Zimbabwe has to offer. So it will always have a really special place in my heart, and it's great to be with you today, albeit I am joining you from the south coast of the UK and not the heart of Africa. So many thanks to the organisers, especially Nunarai, my good friend, for inviting me to moderate this panel session. We've got a really informed and varied panel that are going to shed some light on where Zimbabwe stands in terms of connecting itself to the world right now and what the immediate sort of objectives are for the country when it comes to the different elements of development. As we probably all know, globally, over 50% of international tourists arrive at their destination by air. And especially on a continent such as Africa, it's obviously huge, it's landlocked, it lacks suitable alternative transport infrastructure. And therefore, aviation will continue to play a vital role in keeping Africa connected and rebuilding the economies in a post-COVID era. So our aim today is to understand Zimbabwe's plan to engage airlines on a domestic, regional, international basis to bring back those high-yielding tourists and business travelers back to the country. We're also going to look at how the tourism industry is working to support this effort. And we're also going to look at it from an airline perspective in terms of what's required in what they look for in terms of support from a destination and an airport partner. So that's pretty much the introduction. I wanted to keep it nice and short and set the scene because we've got some great panelists. So what I'll do is I'll introduce the panelists and ask them a question at the same time, so we don't go through the rigmarole of sort of doing four bios and then going back to everyone. So I'd like to start with Tawanda. So Tawanda Gusha is the Chief Executive Officer of the Airports Company of Zimbabwe. Tawanda and I have known each other for quite some time, and he was obviously with the Civil Aviation Authority as well. He's got 22 years of experience in aviation, having joined the Department of Civil Aviation as a trainee air traffic controller, and then moving into airport management, where he rose through the ranks to his from Director of Airports to now obviously CEO of the airport company. So Tawanda, welcome to the broadcast. It's great to have you with us. Let's start by discussing your current activities, your current priorities. What are you doing right now to attract and engage new airlines to either return to Zimbabwe or to stay there or to increase their capacity?
Thank you very much, John, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be a part of this exciting discussion. Yes, we've been working with the tourism industry to ensure that we bring in more airlines into Zimbabwe and also retain the current ones. Our strategy has been really to offer airline incentives, that is the discounts to aerodrome charges, and as well as to make it easy for airlines to operate into our airports. The one critical activity that we are currently undertaking is the Victoria Falls Air Service Development Program, which with support from the IFC and the World Bank has also been extended to include the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport in Harare. And we are targeting to develop Victoria Falls as a tourism, or as the gateway into the Southern African tourism product. So this is what we've been working on, and recently we were at World Routes in Milan, where we were meeting with potential airlines as well as existing airlines to learn and to understand their plans as we go into the future. Our aim really is to ensure that we grow our destination. We have more airlines flying into our airports. So that is so far what we've been doing. That is what we're currently doing, John. What I can also then probably say is that we are also very excited that in 2021, would you believe it, just 2021, we've had 2 new airlines coming in addition to the other airlines also restarting their operations. I know we are with Karen here, BA Come restarted their operations also in 2021. But we've had exciting developments in the Zimbabwean airspace, where we've got Mark Air, which is now connecting Victoria Falls and Kasane in Botswana. We also then received Qatar Airways in August, which is also flying into Harare. So for us, it has been quite exciting, and we are continuing with the drive to make sure that we get more airlines flying into Zimbabwe, John. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we'll come back to you on some of the specific markets that you're looking at and some of the successes. I believe, because I received the information yesterday, LAM Mozambique has also announced they're returning into Zimbabwe in December. So that's another great regional route that's being restarted, I think, from, is it 3 points in Mozambique, something like that?
Yes, absolutely, John.
So I think, that's great. And that's actually where Aviadev sits very much. We want to be a connector of the regional and domestic destinations first. And obviously we understand the need for that international feed. And we're seeing a lot of the international airlines now in Africa generally coming back in, putting a lot of capacity in. South Africa is really ramping up. And obviously that will, there'll be more, I'm sure, coming for Zimbabwe as well. So we'll come back to you, Tawanda, for some more questions shortly. I'd like to bring Karen into the conversation. So Karen Tumasos is the Vice President for Access at the Tourism Business Council of Zimbabwe. She is also wearing an airline hat. She has one of those anyway in the closet. She has been the Regional Operations Manager for Comair for 14 years. and over 25 years experience in the wider travel industry, having managed 14 safari camps and lodges in Zimbabwe. So Karen, I wanted to bring you into the conversation to ask about, obviously you're there representing the Tourism Business Council. So I want to try and understand, what type of organizations does your membership consist of, and how do you work with people, stakeholders like Tawanda? Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Unmute. So we consist of a wide range of the industry, from hotels to safari operators. We have the hunters, we have access from car hire companies. So it's everything. Everybody in the private sector joins in with us to as part of TBZZ. We work closely with Tawanda, you know, in any aspect of airline travel. We consult with them, they consult with us. So the minute they're doing something, they always bring us into what's going on to see what our angle is. From a tourism point of view, from airlines, it's just a case of collaboration all around, rather than a sort of a one end where they do something and then we sit back and go, okay, what are you doing? So there's a lot of collaboration going on in developing the market in Zimbabwe. And as Tawanda said, you know, with the new airlines coming in, we're now becoming what we were 23 years ago. You know, Zimbabwe used to be a hub for Africa. We kind of lost it over the sort of middle years, but it seems that we're getting that back. So traffic's coming back into us, then going on to the rest of Africa, rather than where it used to do sort of South Africa or another country and then come back into Zimbabwe. So it's really becoming vibrant. You're seeing those airlines coming in again, a lot of activity going on.
Fantastic. And obviously, geographically speaking, Zimbabwe is well located, you know, for feed into the rest of the SADC region. In terms of when you hear about, obviously, the activities that Tawanda's doing proactively, and of course the airlines making their own decisions, do you feel as a council, you know, do you have enough time? Would you like more time between hearing about the airline coming in and actually, you know, normally it's quite short window of opportunity?
You know, I think, John, we're quite prepared. I mean, we've heard about a lot of airlines coming in over the years, and they've kept threatening and threatening. So we're always on sort of ready. We're always in Zimbabwe, because we adapt so quickly to everything. We just want them here. You know, I don't care if they arrive tomorrow. We'll make a plan to get them to work. So the sooner the better. We'll adapt quickly. You know, things change. I mean, we're fluid. I mean, even at the airports, you know, you change something today, by tomorrow it's implemented. You wouldn't even notice from an outsider looking in. You would have said, wow, how did that happen? So there's a lot of sort of motion and working together that keeps us fluid in Zimbabwe.
Right, amazing. Yeah, and we'll come back to that, and I've got some questions for our airline guys about, obviously, you know, the communications process and the way that the planning process happens now, because COVID's changed a lot of the way the airlines work. They're very much more short term in their planning horizons. So thank you for that kickoff. So I'd like to bring on our third panelist, which is Julian Edmonds, who is from FastJet. So Jules joined FastJet in 2019 to head up the commercial side for both FastJet Zimbabwe and also Federal Airlines in South Africa. He's also a safari tour operator. He got a little bit bored of this at one point, decided to learn to fly, and then became a commercial pilot in 2001, and then moved in after being a commercial pilot, also working in the management side as well, and has led some of Africa's most well-known safari airlines. So he has a real depth of knowledge and experience. So Julian, welcome. And I want to talk to you about the market itself. You know, how resilient has the Zimbabwean market been for FastJet? What is it that's driving the traffic? Is it leisure? Is it trade? Is it VFR, visiting friends and relatives? You know, how's it been? Obviously, talk us through from you coming into FastJet and all the plans that you had, then of course the COVID side of things, and where we sit now.
Good morning, John. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. John, to answer your question, I mean, we don't know. I mean, basically, our current business is bits of everything. The core for us, and we have different routes. So the core for us is that we have, obviously, we fly between Harare and Johannesburg up to 5 times a day on certain days. These are very short-term routes in terms of lead time. You know, we can have a plane looking empty on a Monday that's full by Thursday. And so it's really, in some ways it's very easy. As Karen was saying, we can react on a very short-term basis. We can add extra capacity on a short-term basis if need be. But it does make planning, sort of longer-term planning, a little bit harder, because you sort of look and say, oh, well, it looks like the market's sort of doing this, so let's add an extra flight at lunchtime. And you do that, and sort of it works nicely for a couple of weeks, and then after that it suddenly doesn't work very nicely. And there's no real rhyme nor reason. You know, obviously Karen and I work for competing airlines. We compete in a very friendly way. We used to work together many years ago, but we at the same time, we're both in the same boat. You know, you can look and you can say something looks as though it's sensible, and then you can't understand why it hasn't worked. Also with us, we fly 50-seat airplanes. So, you know, an extra 5 people is another 10% load factor. So you know, there's real anomalies. The analytical sample sometimes can get skewed by one large family going down for a family event. And it gives you a false, you know, a false sense of what the market is doing. What we have noticed is that the our Zimbabwean passenger has been exceedingly loyal, have enjoyed some of the changes that we have made. We've moved and we've transitioned from being a sort of classic low cost into actually being really rather generous carrier. Currently, I believe we offer the best flexible policy of almost any airline in Africa. We're offering unlimited changes, no change fees, no fare differences, as long as those changes are done more than 48 hours in advance. People get stuck in traffic jams because of curfews. So if they arrive late at the airport, we don't giggle at them and make them pay a new fare. We put them on the next flight. So little things like that that we've done to try and make people's lives a bit easier. Before COVID, we were busy trying to sort of roll out a whole lot of new routes, and they all got sort of stamped on, and you know, like everything. But I'm happy to say that last week we officially relaunched our Victoria Falls to Nelspruit, Kruger and Mpumalanga International Airport. We'll be starting at 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We want to go daily by July if possible. We'll be launched, first flight is 16th of March. And our flight is great because it offers the tourist the opportunity to do an activity in the morning and in the afternoon at both ends. And obviously for some of the tourists coming, they're spending a lot of money. And that morning game drive is really quite important, as is the evening booze cruise on the Zambezi. So we offer the opportunity in both directions for people to be able to do things and travel during the middle of the day.
Yeah, I think the things you've hit on there is that requirement now. I was talking to a aviation software provider yesterday, and he was talking about the ability to offer flexibility, and the booking process is much later. But just to follow up on that quickly, are you finding that you get most of your bookings, are they direct? They come through FastJet directly? Is that changed, that kind of booking pattern? And are you getting, because people are booking later, does that mean you're getting a better fare, or does that not really make, that doesn't necessarily work?
No, it doesn't. It just, the fare ladder climbs in a shorter period. But basically, no, I mean, our distribution pattern hasn't really changed. So we offer, what we have done though, is we've added some sort of clever payment methodologies. So for example, you don't need to go into one of our shops now. You don't need to use a card. You can go into any CBZ branch in Zimbabwe, give them your FastJet reference number and pay them the money, and it will automatically issue your ticket. You can do that also to any Chicken Inn branch in Zimbabwe. So where there's over 100 Chicken Inn branches throughout urban Zimbabwe, you can go into any one of them with your FastJet booking. And they can, in their gap system, they can call it up and they can say, this is what you owe us, you pay it. If you want to, you can also have a delicious chicken burger and you will get your FastJet ticket. So we've tried, again, we're trying very hard to make life as easy as possible. So if you want to go to your travel agent, we have 100% support the travel agencies. We're a full member of the Zimbabwe BSP. We're available on the GDSs, and we definitely are very supportive of that chain. We also have obviously our own sales shop in Harare and another one at Fazax in Bulawayo. We have obviously sales shops at every airport that we fly in and out of. So you can buy from us directly if you'd like, but also, you know, our website is still very important. And then we're available through various API connections with all the big OTAs throughout the world too.
Yeah, so it's a bit like you said about the makeup of the passengers. It's the same thing with the makeup of how they book. It's a case of be everywhere and pick up a bit from everywhere, and it sort of comes together and reduce that friction. I know that I heard about the chicken in. That's really interesting, and I want to get our final panelists to talk about that a little bit. But I think that FastJet as well pioneered a few years ago about ShopRite as well. You could buy tickets at the supermarket.
Well,
like
yes,
that.
I mean, sort of. I mean, ShopRite in South Africa, they use the CompuTicket. CompuTicket have brand and branches in ShopRites, which offer travel as a byproduct of that. One of the things we're also doing is between the two airlines that we have in the FastJet group. Obviously, Federal Airlines is very tourism, safari tourism related, and has had a good trading relationship with over 700 tour operators throughout the world for many, many years. Next week, at World Travel Market, I will be officially announcing, I'll do it now. We will officially announce that Federal Airlines will be a FastJet GSA for the FastJet tourism product, so that any Federal Airlines tour operator can buy any FastJet product they would like. But they will enjoy the same benefits that they've always enjoyed from Federal Airlines. So they will keep their same accounting arrangements, and also the ticket terms that they will be getting for the FastJet product will be the same as they currently enjoy for Federal.
Fantastic. Right. Okay. We'll come back to you shortly, but I do want to bring in our fourth panelist, Sean Mendes. So Sean is joining us today from Malawi. He currently provides executive level advisory services to the African aviation sector. He's also a well-known and well-respected commentator on multiple platforms, including AviaDev itself. His previous roles include serving as Chief Operations Officer at Africa World Airlines in Ghana, where he oversaw an impressive expansion that was also profitable, which is an interesting word. He has also worked in airport management, managing Mogadishu International Airport in Somalia, and also held roles at a cargo airline. So he's got the full gamut of experience. He's very well informed, and as I say, is one of the leading voices. So thanks for joining us, Sean. We wanted to bring you in to give us the airline perspective. And I actually I'm going to come back to Tawanda shortly, and you can talk about what you've heard already. But in terms of the specific thing that I wanted to ask you, it was to go back to what Tawanda kind of mentioned that I'm going to go a bit deeper on, which is attracting the airlines back in the current environment. So incentive programs and the use of these in the African market to bring in new airlines or to support airlines that are sort of struggling. How do you see these working? Are they a good idea? Do they work? Does it actually appeal to the airlines, or is there a better way to support the airlines that maybe isn't so sort of painful for the income of the airports company?
Thanks for having me. And that's a very interesting question to start off. I'll take the first part of it and say, is this something that airlines like? And I don't think I've ever seen an airline that would say no to free money. So definitely, yes, airlines like it. However, the next part of the question is a bit tricky. Is this the best way to develop air services in general? And to that, I think you have, there's a fine line between incentives on one hand and subsidy on the other. And while incentives are good because they encourage a market to develop quickly, they're a catalyst. Subsidies, on the other hand, can be market distorting. They can, they can get people to do things that really don't otherwise make sense because there's a pot of money coming in from the outside that suddenly make it make sense, even though that's not what the market determines. And I think in Africa particularly, and I think a part of this, in fact, a big part of this is because governments are such big stakeholders and players in the aviation and tourism sectors themselves. Governments tend to own and operate airports. Governments tend to own and operate airlines, often owning and operating both airports and airlines in the same place. And as a result, it's not necessarily the market's interests which are driven by some of these programs, but sometimes vested interests, whether that is within the government itself or whether individuals in government as well. So certainly it's a great concept, but I think the devil is in the detail as to how this can be executed well. The government is best served by not viewing aviation and tourism as a soft touch for taxation, which seems to have been something that a lot of governments throughout Africa have done. Aviation and tourism is viewed as a luxury product, and therefore the people who consume it are viewed as easy people to go after for more taxes. And as a result, that dampens the market. The government is better served, rather than providing subsidies to players, whether private sector or public sector, is better served by investing that money in infrastructure development. Develop the entire market, and then you will actually see private sector players who actually see new opportunities and are agile enough. And I think what Jules was saying about what FastJet has had to do, before the pandemic and during the pandemic in a very difficult environment, is they've shown how quickly a company can be agile, can adapt itself. And the private sector is able to do this a lot faster than the public sector is. And I think when governments, when airport authorities, when the various stakeholders are able to realize this and put their support towards developing infrastructure, supporting the industry in general, rather than targeting cash handouts to failing state-owned carriers or similar, I think that's when we'll really see a strong acceleration in African aviation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I suppose it's, if you're a commercial entity, it's adapt or die. Whereas if you're a state-owned entity, it's that you could adapt, and if you don't, then we'll probably give you a bailout. So don't worry too much about it. And you just don't have that option if you're a private company, as obviously FastJet, and it's the same as us. It's the same as Aviadev. We do live events. They were destroyed by the COVID, so we had to adapt. Nobody was going to support us through it. And I think the important thing with the incentives is it should be just that. It should be a support to get things off the ground, to show that there's a relationship, to build that relationship, so that one day that can be removed, as opposed to it being a kind of a milk bottle that just keeps getting filled up to support the airline over time. So I want to bring you in on this, Tuanda, because you mentioned that there's an incentive scheme. How much information you can give us about that is up to you, but just your general thoughts on what you've heard from Sean, and how you're looking to use incentive schemes and to actually get these airlines to start flying into Zimbabwe.
Thank you, John. So our approach has been really to say that the first thing is to grow the traffic. We want the airlines to come into the country. Like what Karen said, we went through a very bad patch where airlines were leaving. We want to get to that point where we've got more airlines that are flying into the country, and where we become a hub or a sub-regional hub, if I may use that term. So because of that, we've been looking at an incentive scheme as a form of, like what Sean is saying, marketing support to the airlines to develop a route. So what we do is that we're looking at our revenue streams and saying that where are we getting most of our revenue? Is it from landing fees? Is it from parking fees? Is it from passenger service charges? And so we say, what is it that we can give? So it's a give and take really situation. So in our case, we've really been looking mostly at landing and parking fees, and saying if we can give incentives towards the landing and parking fees, we're helping the airline to say also grow that route for a period. So we've been having a very generous incentive scheme, which of course at the moment we are varying depending on circumstances, where we've been saying that for the first 12 months of operation, if it's a new airline, it's 100% discount. We reduce that to 50% discount at some given point. And then we see how that goes. Because we're weighing between the landing and parking charges as well as the passenger service charges. And we see that we get more value from the passenger service charges than we get than the loss, if you want, in costs we may experience for a period from not collecting landing and parking charges from the airline. So that is what we've been looking at, really. And I think so far it has worked very well. And maybe if I may just digress and go back to what you mentioned about Mozambique. Yes, we're excited about the future developments. We're not only talking about Mozambique for argument's sake. I know that the Victoria Falls community is excited about the upcoming route that Julian is talking about between Victoria Falls and Mpumalanga. We also are excited about Eurowings Discover, which is the first European carrier to fly into Victoria Falls. So for us, that is a first starting from March next year. And again, this is all the efforts that we've been engaging. We've been talking to Lufthansa, the Lufthansa group, over the years at various forums, be it Routes forums, Aviation forums, as well as ITB, to mention just a few of those engagements that we have had. So those are the kind of programs that, or rather success stories that we talk about. Again, it's also part of the incentive program that we have in place, which is giving us those airlines. And in addition to that, I might also then just hasten to add that sometimes when you then give the incentives, you're not really looking at the benefits, the immediate benefits to the airports company, but also to the country. Like in this case, Victoria Falls will benefit, the tourism industry in Victoria Falls will benefit, and ultimately the economy will benefit. So this is our approach, and we intend to see it through and continue with that approach. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fine balancing act, and it's music to my ears when I hear what you've just said, that the country is taking a view of looking at the bigger picture and the whole value chain that's going to benefit. And it's a bitter pill to swallow because, of course, we know that an airport to run safely and securely has huge fixed costs, whether you have any aircraft movements or none. And of course, one way to recoup that money that's lost if you've got fewer movements is to charge each movement more money. But that is only going to put off the airlines that could come in, because ultimately the airline chooses where it flies its aircraft. And if you're not going to attract them in to you, they'll go to your neighbor where there is something more attractive. So I think that attitude and that strategy, I'm 100% behind, because I think this is the way forward. And we saw Willie Walsh, the DG of IATA, he was calling out all sorts of airport authorities, including a few in Africa as well, for simply raising their parking fees, their landing fees, because they're trying to make up for lost revenue and obviously trying to balance the books. So I'm guessing outside of the incentive scheme, there aren't any plans right now to raise the fees. You're not in that bag. All right, putting you on the spot.
No, unfortunately, as a small, our aviation industry is small in the country. We are a small player compared to, say, South Africa, for argument's sake. So yes, certainly we cannot afford the luxury of increasing those fees at will. I know some big airports out there, on their budget, there's a line to say we are increasing our landing fees the following budget year, or we increasing this other aerodrome charge and that other aerodrome charge. We do not have that luxury. So because we do not have that luxury, we have to then work with what we have and see how best, like you actually say, we can then balance it out. So the short answer to your question is no, we're not planning on increasing the charges anytime soon.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And thank you to the people who are putting in some questions in the chat. Do keep those coming, and I will come back to those, don't worry. And we are looking at them, and I think Julian's replied to a couple of comments already. So do feel free to get involved. We are monitoring that. Karen, I want to come back to you. Let's talk about the actual areas where you see the lowest hanging fruit, you know, from a geographic perspective. Traditionally, what have been the strongest markets for inbound tourism to Zimbabwe, and has that changed? And you know, can you enlighten us as to which parts of the world and which parts of Africa are showing the signs of recovery that your kind of members are excited about, that you're obviously aligned with Tuanda?
So I think that right now we're excited about any traffic. So wherever it comes from, we don't really care. We've seen over the last couple of months, the traffic coming back from America, which has been fantastic because their restrictions are as great as the rest of Europe. Quarantines were in there. So they had a lot of free travel coming in there. So America's been dribbling back into Zimbabwe. Parts of Europe have come back in, and we're to Africa, really. You know, from a BA perspective of mainline, they've suddenly put on more flights coming into South Africa. And we're seeing that coming through and I'm going to speak domestically now in South Africa. On our domestic flights, we're getting, you know, 50, 60 passengers off of the BA mainline flight coming onto our flights into Zimbabwe, into other destinations in South Africa. So it's starting, that trickle is starting to come back. From a tourism perspective, I think the market struggled here a lot to keep up with our employees and our staff. The hotels have struggled over the COVID period, as I'm sure all areas have. But they're coming back and they're offering the product, the service, everything that was there before. I think on a sort of like they've upped their game. So what we were before, because of COVID, we've actually had to rethink what we're doing. And the lodges, the hotels, they're 100% more better than they were before, for bad English, because they want that tourist back. They're not complacent anymore.
Yeah, they've used the time to revamp, and you know, we've said this about airports as well. It's like you should now use this time to do those developments that you've been saying, but of course, you know, they haven't got the revenue coming in, so it's a brave one that spends the money in that downtime. It's convenient from a time perspective, but it's an issue from a cash flow perspective. No, that's great. Thank you for that insight. Julian, want to come back to you. I obviously asked Sean about the incentive schemes. We've heard from Tuanda about the activities that they're doing, the incentive schemes. FastJet's kept Zimbabwe connected through the pandemic and is recovering and keeping it connected now. You know, how is your relationship with the airports company? How can they support you? Do they support you? You know, and what more could they do?
I noticed Tuanda's turned off his camera, so I can't see I can't see his responses. But actually, no, to be fair, we have an exceedingly good working relationship with Tuanda and his team, and they're very supportive of us. They've got a lot of development programs going on themselves, some of which involve, for example, the closure of Harare Airport at 10 o'clock every evening. For runway rehabilitation work, for example. And we've every now and again had times where we've had technical challenges and we've needed to keep the airport open to allow for a late arrival. And Tuanda's team have always been exceedingly supportive to try and accommodate that, as have the team up in Victoria Falls, as have the team down in Bulawayo. So on a day-to-day basis, we have an exceedingly close and very good working relationship with the airports company of Zimbabwe. With regard to, they are constantly knocking on my door with regard to new routes and encouragement for us to do new things. You know, some of we can only grow so fast, so quickly. There are a lot of new routes out there we would love to do, but we need to get them sort of all done at the right time rather than sort of turn them all on immediately. But yeah, we have a good working relationship with them. Undoubtedly, anything, as Sean alluded to, anything more they can do to give us things for free would be even better. But you know, we have no complaints.
Fantastic. And do you know, how closely do you work with them from a kind of data sharing perspective when it comes to deciding on these, when the right time is to start the new route? do you do this yourself? Is it predominantly run by the numbers that you guys run and the work that you do, or is it supported by the airports company and of course the Tourism Business Council as well?
Well, it is a collaborative effort, what we tend to find is that we will definitely sit down and talk to the Civil Aviation Authority of Zimbabwe, the Airports Company of Zimbabwe. We also, through a lot of their sort of yeah, the word's gone, but with their collaborations, external collaborations with people like Westgrow, et cetera, et cetera. So we've done quite a lot of work with the Cape Town Air Access team, who were advising Kruger and Mpumalanga. They also have been advising Victoria Falls. And so we have done quite a lot of work with them, and you know, I'm constantly speaking to them with regard to other ideas. The big problem is particularly from a tourism business council type scenario. Yes, we do speak to members of the Tourism Business Council, but we tend to do it slightly more in an individual way. Karen and I compete, so I can't go and sit there with her and say, "Oh, what do you think about me starting this new route?" Because potentially I would be doing half her work for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, understood. And I think it's like you say, it's getting that balance right, but you know, bringing people in when it works. Yeah, it reflects really well. Sean, I want to come to you because you're very much somebody who can look at the macro in terms of the African environment. You know, how do you see Zimbabwe's position for recovery? You know, give us the sort of specifics on where does Zimbabwe sit in terms of what should it be looking at? Is it in a favorable spot for this recovery, and what should it be aware of as well?
You know, John, I didn't know that you were going to be actually asking that question, but I've written a bunch of notes during the last things just based on what Karen was saying earlier about which markets are the ones that are strongest. And I found it very interesting to hear that most of the markets that are being discussed here, and which obviously seem to be the markets that are being focused upon, are what I'd call the traditional tourist source markets, which are long haul intercontinental source markets. And I think that is actually something which a lot of African tourism authorities are missing the point on, which is they don't focus as much as they should on their regional markets, on the African market. Connectivity, air connectivity in particular, is lacking between the African countries. And, for someone like me who's in Malawi, I find it faster, easier, and cheaper for me to get to Dubai or even to Europe than it is for me to get to Vic Falls, which is literally just one country away. And while the rest of the world, while these markets definitely have more spending power right now, they're not seeing the same amount of growth as you are in Africa. And the growth in Africa is coming from the bottom end of the market. You know, I think about 40-something countries in Africa have now entered the lower middle income category, which is about 1,000 to 5,000 US dollars per year per capita GDP. And that is actually a sweet spot for air traffic and travel growth in general, because below that 1,000 per capita, GDP growth and air traffic growth are more or less at the same speed. Above 5,000, once again, they're more or less at the same speed. But in this 1,000 to 5,000 range, this sweet spot in lower middle income, air traffic grows at double the rate of GDP growth. And this is for a variety of reasons. And if you think about it, just from your own personal experience, you realize that as someone gets more disposable income, the first thing they spend it on is consumer goods. But the second thing they spend it on is travel. Now, that travel isn't all, leisure travel. They're not all paying to go to safari lodges or on vacations. But as people are earning more, as people have more disposable income, and as they are earning more, they value their time more. When you're making $1 a day, you can afford to spend 14 to 16 hours on a bus to get to your destination because it's not costing you that much. When you're making $100 a day, certainly you don't want to be, your time is much more valuable, and you'd rather pay that extra amount to get involved with the air traffic. as the economies improve, and this is happening all over Africa, you find more urbanization, more entrepreneurship. And these entrepreneurs, they travel more, they have more disposable income. But also importantly, the new consumers in Africa are globalized. You have the millennials who have grown up in Africa using the same type of smartphones, watching the same Netflix shows, doing everything that everyone, that young consumers everywhere in the world have. So again, looking at Africa from that old legacy view as there isn't spending power and people don't travel, I think is very short-sighted. I think, airlines and tourism authorities in Africa need to look more regionally to be able to push that. And I think someone like Zimbabwe will have a very strong cost advantage over a lot of destinations outside of the continent where more affluent Africans tend to spend. If places like Zimbabwe, places like Zambia, Botswana, and so forth, made it easier for African tourists, whether that means through encouraging better air connectivity, offering African resident rates, like I've seen a number of places begin to do in the last few years. These are the kind of things which really will drive the growth. While I think right now the focus seems to be more in terms of getting a larger slice of the same size pie, I'd rather be the person going out there and putting the ingredients together to just bake another much larger pie going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It brings us into one of the questions I wanted to ask, which really, I think maybe to come to you actually, Karen, on the back of this as well, is we heard so much. I did a lot of work in the SADC region, and when COVID hit, there was this sudden realization that the tap has been turned off for those high-yielding international tourists. And it was suddenly like, well, how are we going to make money from domestic and potentially regional? But at the outset, it was very much domestic was the only travel that was allowed. And my question is that a trend? Have people learned from that and said, you know what, there is a market here that we can work with that's way more resilient, that's the word, to these impacts? Or are we now going to think, right, okay, COVID's gone, let's go back to being completely dependent on high-yielding international tourists. Let's focus all our money and all our efforts on trying to bring them into the African continent and spend lots of money in a smaller number? Or do you think there is this, do you know what, as Africans, we want to discover the region that we live in. We don't, when we take a holiday, want to go to London or Dubai. We quite fancy going to Maputo or Gaborone or Windhoek or wherever you want to go. So how do you see that? Was it a sticking plaster, or is it a change, a paradigm shift?
No, I think it's definitely not a paradigm shift. I mean, as Julian said, we got some good support in the local market during COVID as things opened up, but the lodges and hotels had to really reduce their prices. So hotels that would charge a foreigner $1,000 a night were suddenly offering it to local people for 150. We would never, as a local person, you would never have gone to that lodge before. You would never have gone to visit some of the areas because you couldn't afford the 1,000 a night. But at 150, you were like, okay, I'll do it as a once in a lifetime trip. So a lot of people locally took advantage of that. There was a lot of travel on the roads. Being regional, I think you've still got that fear of South Africans who don't necessarily want to travel. I mean, even during COVID in South Africa, we pulled out of the market as Comair because there just wasn't enough traffic. So locally, the South Africans didn't want to travel. I think there's still a lot of fear within Africa, and a lot of the regulations stop them because they've, the COVID test, do I have to quarantine? A lot of the markets are not clear about what their quarantine restrictions are. So you see something on a website, you're like, is that real? Do I have to quarantine now for 14 days when I arrive somewhere? The international traveler, on the other hand, sort of thinks, well, if I have to quarantine, it seems that I can quarantine at the resort I'm going to. So I'm happy days to go to my resort and stay there. So I think locally and regionally, we have to get over a fear of traveling again, and maybe try and stimulate it. And I mean, Sean, I liked what you said. We do have to stimulate it within Africa, within the continent, rather than depending on the foreigner to come in here all the time. Because a mistake, again, I mean, Julian and I worked for the same company 23 years ago. We went and outsourced to a foreign company. When that source dried up, we literally had no one because we put all our eggs in one basket. And hopefully, you know, going forward, we won't do that again. As a country, we won't put our eggs all in one basket again.
Yeah, maybe there's an opportunity to seasonalize it as well, where there's opportunities for lower rates in the off seasons to support that market, and sort of, that's one option. I'd love to bring you into this, Jules, because you've got both hats, the aviation and tourism hat. How do you see this? Because you are obviously operating these ERJ 145, so the smaller regional jets. So you don't have that ability to go, oh yeah, FastJet are going to start a flight to London or whatever. If you're going to benefit from the internationals, it will be from the feed that comes through Harare, etc. But how do you see that? Do you agree with Karen?
Yeah, I do, and I agree with Sean what he's saying. I mean, I think it would be great for us to develop, and it is the untapped market. But I think almost before we get to trying to get the people from Malawi to come to Vic Falls, we've got to get the people from Malawi to go on holiday in Malawi. And that's the thing. We've actually all got to start developing our own proper domestic tourism networks. And once people are used to sort of going on formal holidays, because most of the people in Africa, their holiday is going home to their family. And what we need to do is, I'm not saying they shouldn't go home to their family, but also they should also go away for the weekend or for a week to somewhere else within their country to start sort of seeing other sides of what the country has to offer. We saw this in South Africa with COVID restrictions, and with federal airlines, we were largely, very, very largely kept alive by local tourists. And we reintroduced a sort of local incentive, and it's an incentive we're now keeping going for forevermore, because we do see this as a developing market. But we've got to get when I lived in Tanzania, there was precious little local Tanzanian tourism. Huge country, lots of different aspects of tourism available there, and almost nobody locally using it. Kenyans, they do a little bit more. There is a little bit more domestic tourism in Kenya. So we've got to try and sort of encourage the domestic tourism within each country. Zim's not bad, actually, in many respects. It's pretty good, and it's developing pretty fast. Now what we've got to do is look at developing the internal infrastructure, which is another subject that Tawanda and I have been chatting about over the last few years. But we need to look at the further development of the internal infrastructure to support that. And that will also support the international and regional tourism going forward. But yes, we do rely on the feeds coming into Harare, into Johannesburg. We have interline agreements with Emirates and Qatar. So we do get a feed in from them too. But we do need to start developing. We need to look at also breaking down some of the traditional barriers that sort of make these interlines quite hard. Really, an interline is the ability to check your luggage through, and that we need to sort of somebody to come up with some clever technology that will allow your luggage to be checked through from Victoria Falls to wherever you're going via Johannesburg and remain in transit. It shouldn't be impossible, and it should not require a formal interline.
Well, that's where actually the airport comes in, because they have to provide that infrastructure, the physical infrastructure to provide that. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, that for those listening and watching who don't understand what the process is. So if you book a ticket on one airline and then you transit through the airport and get on another airline to go somewhere else. But if you virtually interline, then your bag ideally would go through. There are airports that do this. Gatwick in London Gatwick does Gatwick Connect. There's Milan, I think, does it. Budapest does it. So the bigger airports. I see this as a massive opportunity for an airports company, because if you did that, it would make you even more attractive to the airlines that have these interlines. If you could provide that facility, and you may get picked then as, actually, I'll use that particular airport as a hub, because I know that it's going to get that bag from A to B, and I'm going to be able to benefit from these interline agreements, because that cooperation and collaboration is definitely something we've seen. So Tawanda, just to close off on that point, I would love to get your thoughts on this in terms of, is the regional and domestic markets that we had to focus on through COVID here to stay, or is it they're probably going to get sidelined again, but we need to keep them in mind?
Thank you, John. I think it's a very valid point that yes, we need to also concentrate on the regional and domestic markets. We like what Julian is saying. We've been talking and discussing and saying how best do we grow the domestic tourism? How best do we ensure that there is access to the other airports where we do not have scheduled movements at the moment? We're talking here of airports such as Kariba, such as Buffalo Range, which we have already also discussed about, because the facilities are there, the infrastructure is there, although it has to be improved, but as a starting point, the facilities are available. So yes, we have to concentrate on that as well. And like I indicated earlier on, we are talking here about, I mentioned the introduction of flights by Mark Air. Mark Air is a Botswana-based airline operating caravans, and on a good day, they are doing 2 flights a day between Kasane and Victoria Falls. Yes, it's a 20-minute flight, but again, that is regional tourism that we are also, or rather regional connectivity that we are also promoting. And like what Julian is talking about, where you have other unknown or new routes, such as the connection between Victoria Falls and Kruger and Mpumalanga, which was never there. We want to try and encourage the airlines to also then consider those routes. We're also here trying to talk about the connectivity. Remember, even when we finished the construction of Victoria Falls, John, in 2016, that's when we started connecting Victoria Falls with Cape Town. We want to try and also do that and connect Victoria Falls with, say, Mombasa, for argument's sake, or other destinations or other tourist resorts. But at the same time, we also need to connect the regional destinations more and better. Like what Sean is saying, yes, it is a pain for intra-Africa travel. Sometimes you have to go outside Africa for you to come back to Africa. For instance, if you want to go to Morocco, maybe, or you want to go to Algeria or any other North African or even West African countries, you have probably first of all to go to Europe or to go to Asia, to Dubai or such other destinations, so that you fly back to Africa. So that is something that we have been talking about, and I'm happy to say also that John has been pushing that agenda also throughout the day to say, let us develop those destinations, let us connect those countries, let's have better connectivity within Africa. And that is what we are trying to do. And I'm happy also to report that as a country, the government has deliberately also signed on to the single African air transport market. That liberates the airspace, that allows for free flow of airlines where the airlines require. So the environment is already there for the airlines to fly in, because the fifth freedom traffic rights between certain countries are a given. It's already a given because of just the signing to the commitment as led by the African Union. So yes, the environment is there, but what we need to do, I think, is to do more. We need to collaborate more. The airports and the airlines have to collaborate more and find better ways of ensuring that we promote intra-African travel more. Thank you, John.
No, I think that's brilliant, and we got through nearly an hour without saying SATAM, so that's quite impressive. I think Sean's smiling as well. And you know, the one thing I would say, because it's just been released, you can get it now. IATA have released the report of what the impact of SATAM is. So those who are watching again who don't have that knowledge, it's the single African air transport market. So basically, open skies and the removal of traffic right requirements to fly between African countries for African carriers as well. But it will only work in association with the free movement of people. So we haven't also talked about visa facilitation. That's vital. And of course, the trade zone as well, because traders are a big part of any airline market anywhere in Africa. It's not just tourism and visiting friends and relatives. So these three things that are the flagship projects of the Agenda 2063 from the African Union, if they're in place, and obviously it's great to hear that Zimbabwe has signed on to the SATAM, but I think 34, 35, Sean can correct me, out of the 54 countries, that's all that's signed, despite this report that I'm alluding to saying that every country out of the 54 would benefit. They would deliver jobs. It would reduce fares for the average traveler. So I've had a question in the chat about why is it expensive? Well, if you create an environment where there is competition, where the private sector feels welcomed, you're going to drive down the price. You're going to increase the capacity. I wanted to, before, because we're about to finish, I was told we can have a couple more minutes, which is great. So I want to come round to each of you for your sort of closing remarks. One of the things that was really interesting that Tuan talked about is obviously that connectivity for people doing multi-destination itineraries, which seems to be a bit of a trend, that somebody from the US, for example, might say, I'm going to come to Africa and I'm going to make it the trip of a lifetime. I'm going to come for 4 weeks. So I want to go and see Cape Town, Vic Falls, Mombasa, Rwanda and the gorillas, whatever it may be. So there's this sort of trend to sort of longer, more complicated holidays. Karen, how does Zimbabwe make the most of that? And is that definitely something that you think is going to be driving the high yielding tourists?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're working closely with the surrounding countries, especially in the Vic Falls area, to make sure the passengers coming in can do that whole tour. So we've got collaborative groups together that, and the IMF is working with us in Vic Falls to make sure that we have common visas, common borders, passengers can move easily in between. And, you know, even Jules is on the same group, but every day there's questions of, can somebody do this? Can we do the other? I think the ease of travel between governments also needs to be sort of decided, because that's our biggest, the confusion between the borders. You know, one country will say you need a visa, a COVID test 72 hours in advance. The other one will say, no, you've got to have it on arrival. So how do I move between borders if one's arrival and one's when I left somewhere else? And maybe getting from America to Zimbabwe takes more than 72 hours. So, you know, those kind of things need to be cleaned up, and COVID's not going away. So I think that coming into Zimbabwe, especially because of the COVID, they want to come, they want to stay for a long period of time in the area and be able to move between the borders. So it's definitely something that has to be looked at.
Fantastic. And Julian, just to come to you for your sort of closing remarks, you know, how optimistic are you about the market? And you know, just reiterate again those new routes that you're talking about as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, look, we continue fighting the good fight. You know, Africa is not the easiest place, as we know, from an aviation development basis. We are confident, but we do realize it is a rocky road or bumpy skies ahead. We're quite sure. From the new route perspective, yes, I mean, Victoria Falls to Kruger and Mpumalanga, or you know, Nelspruit to Victoria Falls is a classic, because a lot of people arrive in Cape Town. They do a week down there. They'll then go through to do a private game reserve in the Sabi Sand, and then they want to come through and end in Vic Falls and maybe continue on into Botswana. And then generically, they've traditionally exited Africa through Johannesburg, or maybe they've continued on up to Nairobi. One of the big drawbacks, not drawbacks, one of the sort of byproducts of the greater connectivity is that some tourists are cherry picking. And so in the old days, we used to get people spending 2.5 to 3 weeks in Zimbabwe. So, you know, my first job in the UK was a safari tour operator selling safaris to British people to go to Zimbabwe, and we'd do, you know, 2 to 3 week itineraries, and they would get to see a huge amount of Zimbabwe. Now they might just see Vic Falls, because they'll be doing the Masai Mara, maybe the Serengeti, down into Victoria Falls and ending up in Cape Town. And they sort of, you know, cherry pick Africa. So what we've got to do is we've got to put, you know, generically, we've actually got to develop the infrastructure better, and we've got to get them not coming for one African holiday in their lifetime. We've got to get them coming every year.
Yeah, and you know, absolutely, and the people that have been, they get bitten by the bug. We know that. But you know, you've got to get them in for that first experience. So, Sean, parting words from you. If you put your airline hat on, give us your thoughts on how you see Zimbabwe from a positioning perspective. What you'd be looking for from them if you were a regional airline or an international airline, and what do you think?
I see nothing but opportunity. I think, you know, it takes me back to something that both Jules and Karen had mentioned earlier. And, you know, Jules mentioned that that Africans need to learn to travel locally first before you can really start, targeting the African market. But I think once again, we're missing the point that we're looking at the Africans of today and yesterday. The Africans of tomorrow, where the growth in these markets is coming from, are so much more globalized. The concept of a cheap city break for them is something that they know of. It may not be something that they have access to because of the lack of infrastructure providing that option to them. But that only means that the person who can come in and provide that infrastructure will be the one to reap the rewards. And Karen mentioned that prices were down and that, it's not sustainable for lodge owners to sell at $150 a night what would usually retail for $1,000. But to me, again, I see an opportunity there because there is a void in the market for the more budget-oriented, shorter-term consumer who's coming for a weekend and not just for a week to, not for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. Why is the focus only being on the high-end tourists from abroad? Why not on the budget tourists from nearby? Certainly, you want the high yield, but you can make as much money selling at a $1 profit to 100 people as you do at a $100 profit to just one person. And the risk is a lot less if the customer is somehow lost due to things like COVID or other external factors. So certainly, I think there is opportunity right now for markets like Zimbabwe, especially for people like Julian, who have the right equipment, who have the right branding, and who have the right positioning to be able to go out there and develop these new markets. That's what FastJet ostensibly was set up to do. And it's great to see them taking the risks on things like Vic Falls to Kruger and things, because those are the kind of markets which really will begin. It may be targeted primarily at external tourists and allowing them to hop between those, but remember, that is just an incremental bit of business, which gives the connectivity for somebody who works in that area to have a business route into Vic Falls. And as more and more of these little lines come together, they become thicker lines, and that improves African connectivity in general and goes back to what Tawanda was saying, that Zimbabwe can once again become a regional hub for the Southern African region.
Amazing. Yeah, and absolutely to echo what you said, we've talked so much about a rising middle class in Africa. And I know our company also organizes the biggest hotel investment conference for Africa. And I know that the big brands, yes, traditionally they were coming in with their 5-star brands. Actually, where they see the opportunity is mid-market, is 2-3-star hotels to cater for the traders, to cater for the local and regional markets, because they're huge. You've got a small number of people that want the 5-star. You've got a lot more people who can now afford the 2-3-star type of accommodation. And there's always been a gap. So that is being closed from a hotel perspective. It's obviously being closed from an airline perspective with some of the airlines that are operating and trying to do that with the lowest possible cost base. So I think that's a really good place. So final word to you, Tawanda, before we close the session, is just to say, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to the Sanganai team. But give us an idea for 2022. We got any new airlines, new routes that you think you're going to hang your hat on, or that you know about that you can share with us, or is it all still a work in progress?
Thank you, John. Like I indicated earlier on, the one new airline that's coming in is Eurowings Discover, which is going to be coming into Victoria Falls via Windhoek from Frankfurt from the 30th of March 2022. And of course, the one new route that is certain is what Julian has spoken about. Of course, we are still in discussions with other airlines, and hopefully we'll continue to get more exciting developments in 2022. I mean, 2022 is a whole new year altogether. And with it also is coming the completion of the new wings at Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport, where we are extending the airport. So that infrastructure development on its own, we're hopeful that it will also assist us in attracting more new airlines into the country. So I think 2022 is full of opportunity, and I'm optimistic that we are going to be developing more, to have more and more exciting developments. Thank you, John.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tawanda. And yeah, of course, we'll be, fingers crossed, bringing AviaDev 2022 live in next year as well. So you'll be getting an invitation for that as soon as we've got that confirmed, which hopefully will be in the next month or so. So watch this space. Thank you to all my panelists. Thank you to Sean. Thank you to Karen. Thank you for Julian. Thank you for Tawanda. Thank you for the wonderful organization over there in Zim. I'm sorry we couldn't be with you. but it seems like a really bright future. There's loads of conversations. We didn't dwell on COVID. We didn't dwell on open skies. We talked, I think, really openly, and there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of space for opportunity. And I'll be watching and covering the story with interest. So Hazel, back to you. And thanks everyone in the audience for watching and participating.
Thank you very much, John. We will, however, accept an invitation to come over there. I know you cannot come to Zimbabwe at the moment.
Well, hopefully it will be in Madagascar, Hazel. So if you haven't been to Madagascar, then that is the plan for AviaDev 2022. We were supposed to be there in 2020, but of course, COVID put a halt on that, or a pause, should I say.
That's all right, John. Thank you very much. Your discussion was very interesting. However, I felt that there was one player missing. Maybe we can invite them next time. That's Air Zimbabwe, the national airline. I'm sure a lot of people would have wanted to find out more about access to local destinations and whether or not they are planning to have international routes coming up shortly. But however, next time we will have them. Thank you, John. John Howell is the CEO and founder of AviaDev, and they were focusing on aviation and tourism development. Thank you very much. Please don't go away. We will be back shortly at 11:30 Central African time. This time we will be focusing on MICE tourism, and we will be joined by the moderator, Tessa Chikaponya, and her panel. Stay tuned.
Bye.
Cheers all.
Thanks,
Cheers,
everyone.
bye. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye, guys.